really, really believing that if I was not trying to make a difference in this world, I was really just taking up space. So part of my kind of conversion and worldview formation really led me to, we need to be agents of redemption, and I needed to have a focus in that area.
David, thanks for your time today. Excited to talk with you. I think if you just start and tell us like a little bit about your background and how you grew up, and if any of that influenced your heart for generosity or what you're doing today, kind of weave that in as well.
Yes, thank you, Micah. Native Atlantan. Father was an orthopedic surgeon, sports medicine guy, and kind of grew up in kind of a upper middle class background, kind of an achievement oriented home. I think a lot of my self-esteem was generated whether or not I was achieving. And so that was working, at least on the outside level, as I kind of went through school, high school. But toward the end of high school, even though I was achieving, I was getting emptier and emptier on the inside. And I think a lot of that had to do with just being very self-absorbed. It was, in a sense, it was all about me. And so although I was achieving, it was not delivering what I hoped or thought it should deliver. And so into my life at that stage walked a young life leader, and just kind of loved on me and leaned into me and just was listening, answering lots of questions, and really met me at my point of need. And so kind of at the end of my high school time is when I made my confession of faith in Jesus, and that started me on a journey. And I say over the next several years, including my college period, a lot of that was kind of worldview formation, asking lots of questions, reading a lot. I mean, C.S. Lewis, Francis Schaeffer, those type of people to really to form my worldview. And I would say as a young adult, I came out the other end of that, really believing that if I was not trying to make a difference in this world, I was really just taking up space. So part of my kind of conversion and worldview formation really led me to, we need to be agents of redemption, and I needed to have a focus in that area.
So David, after college, I think you went to Dartmouth. Did you move back to Atlanta and get straight in the real estate business, or where did you go right after college?
Yeah, I came back to Atlanta. Never had any wanderlust. Atlanta, was a growing, like you see what Nashville's been doing in the last decade or more. Atlanta was kind of like that, going back a few decades. And so I never really felt like I needed to go anywhere else. It was a great place to do business, to start a family, to be part of the community. So I went back. Also, my girlfriend, that I knew from high school, we were dating in college, and so that was another reason to head back to Atlanta. And so after really working with my dad for a few years, in 1980 jumped into real estate, and been in that for 40 plus years now.
That's awesome. So have you always been focused on the development side, or did you start in the brokerage business?
I started with a brokerage business with Cushman & Wakefield, leasing office space. Really, the advice I got was learn how to lease, market, where value is created, and that's the advice I received. And so I jumped into the brokerage and spent probably about 4 years there before I jumped in with a Texas developer. This was late 80s, and then that was a very difficult time for development in general. And I got laid off. I got fired, and then a year later, the company that I had been with was bankrupt, like many of the Texas-based developers and of that era. And so I was on my own for a year, and then late 80s decided to didn't want to go back into brokerage, and so formed Regent Partners back in 1988, and those were still, that was kind of the still dark days where we were still doing some brokerage for sure, just to pay the bills and earn a living. But my aspirations were to be on the investment and or development side. And over time, a few years later, I had the opportunity to link up with a big capital source, actually kind of sold my company, later bought it back, but had very, very important was I had in the early 90s, I had access to capital when capital was scarce. And that allowed us to do some acquisitions in the early 90s, RTC, some foreclosure properties. And then by the mid 90s, when Atlanta and the region was really booming and job growth, and kind of converted to a lot of development. And so that was a very pivotal time to have access to capital, to be able to do a lot of different types of development and really kind of, learn that side of the business. And so we've been, since that time, the early mid 90s, we've been kind of a value add investor, developer of mixed use real estate, the major product types: office, hotel, multifamily housing.
David, it's interesting. You're in my story has a lot. I also became a Christian through Young Life, and I also started as a broker at Cushman and Wakefield. It was called something else, but it's all the same guys that are the Cushman guys in Nashville. But can you give the listeners some perspective on the scale of your company, the type of projects you guys do, and what your focus is?
Yeah, we've done about $3 billion in development or investment. Atlanta-based, but primarily a southeastern platform. We've got 400 plus units under development in Nashville right now, for example. We've got a big mixed-use development on the river in Savannah, which is we've been working. But in Buckhead, Atlanta, we bought the Tower Place complex back in the early 90s, and that had land, and we subsequently bought more land, and done a lot of development in Buckhead, Atlanta, including 50-story mixed-use tower of condos and office, kind of the tallest building in Atlanta in the last 30, 35 years. But you talk about you think of the Thompson. We've developed a couple of Thompson hotels recently, and of course you got the Gulch Thompson, which was really kind of the model we were looking at, just the success of that one down there. And so we've done a couple of Thompsons recently, one in Buckhead, one in Savannah. But mixed use environment. We bought in Atlanta the Concourse complex. The King was kind of known as the King and Queen. It was $300 million acquisition that we kind of built it up to about a $500 million asset and sold it. And we bought that in 12 and sold that in 15. So that was a very kind of opportunistic play, but a big successful project for us. And we like mixed use. I mean, there are not that many developers that have multiple disciplines under their roof. So a lot of them are specialized in one product type. The fact that we do at least three of the major product groups, we kind of gravitate to kind of more urban mixed use type development that have a lot of complexity to them, but where we can see how the pieces fit together and do those type of projects. But we've always, when the market's down, we're trying to be an opportunistic value add buyer. There hadn't been many of those opportunities. Since the last 10 years, there's been so much capital in the market. It's been primarily a development market, but we're right now, as you know, we're in a changing world where a lot of headwinds for real estate with the rapid, incredible increase in construction costs, and then of course now the interest rate, capital markets environment, a lot of stress on the real estate. So feel like we're in a hang on, stay alive to 25 type of world, and we'll see how that. So we've got probably 300 plus million under development right now. We've had projects stall because of the real estate market, but we're out there and trying to keep a little powder dry and use our dollars carefully, because these pre-development dollars can really stack up and create some stress.
David, I remember a couple of points in our journey together. One, maybe 20 or 23 years ago, early 2000s, coming to Atlanta, Greg Murtha and I. So I would have been 38 or 40, coming up on 40. You're a little bit older than me, and I'm a real estate developer, of course, as is Micah. And sitting down with you and Buckhead and really talking about your halftime journey, because you were thinking through, okay, how does a real estate developer make a contribution? Do you bail out of this business and go just do ministry? Do you do ministry alongside it? Does this give you credibility? And that's one point I'd like you to take us back to, because you made some big decisions then that provide a wonderful model for others following in your footsteps that want to do a parallel track of, kind of creating wealth and using the wealth wisely. And then the second time that comes to mind that we'll come to in a little bit is coming back over and having dinner with you in 08, 09. And you had, this really tall tower in the air and a whole lot of high-end condos, and nothing was happening, right?
Yeah.
These are both points of faith and inflection points that we can learn from. So take us back early. Like, how did you come up with this model in your mind?
Well, yeah, I was, as you kind of stages of life, you start out in your career and, your faith is intact, but, raising family, starting business, engagement in civic stuff, ministry stuff through that, but very busy season of life. And again, about that 40-ish or so, and that's kind of the season in which I met Bob Buford. And when he was talking about halftime before the book was even out. And boy, those early conversations really resonated with me and touched on some, some restlessness perhaps that was beginning to bubble up inside of me is like there's more to it than just the business game. And so, with a lot of, the halftime when the book came out, read it, resonated, and really got me, kind of set me on a course to be more intentional about what does that look like. So, that parallel track, staying very engaged in my business, but trying to, over time, create more margin to initially time to how do I begin to be engaged in more things. And I would say, so that was very formative. And I think that then there was a major pivot point about the time I was 50. Our kids had just left, so we were empty nesting. Business was doing well. So I had the margin. I could create more margin in my business by getting out of the day to day, and it put me in a position to spend more time in reflection, listening to God to say, okay, what next? And so that really kind of launched a season that I felt like over a period of a few years, God started to lay things on my heart that I should be about for the foreseeable future. And we can talk about some of those, but the margin was really important. Carving out time to listen to God, to be prepared to follow that prompt, that quiet voice, and explore some things. And I realized too, when those things got kind of laid on my heart, that a lot of the things I'd been doing in my 30s and 40s were preparing me for that. So they were not, I think God uses it. One of the lessons is I think God uses our experiences, good and bad, to help prepare us for that next phase. And where you're learning about what you're good at, what you're not good at, where your passions are, life experiences, all that. Those are all kind of create a mosaic that helps build a platform. So, I certainly encourage those that are in their 20s and 30s and so forth to, get engaged out there, do those kind of those soft efforts that halftime talks about. Do those exploratory, it's archaeology, as Bob used to say. Do those and learn and engage, and you don't know how that will come back to you, but it will.
And David, it's interesting the way you describe that time that you created to listen to the Lord, because Jesus explained the fourth soil in this way. I'll just read it. He said, the seed sown in good soil represents people who hear the word, accept it, and then produce a crop, some 30, some 60, some 100 times. Isn't that interesting that those are the specific instructions if you want to be a life that produces 100-fold? And so you intuitively took time to stop, listen, and then muster the courage to step out and act on it. Take us just a little bit deeper. What would that look like for you to really slow down? I understand getting rid of the day-to-day and moving more to a chairman type role.
Right.
But what did the listening look like and feel like to you? And how does that happen?
I think it's scheduling time on some type of semi-regular basis. It's I get in a quiet place. There's a place in my home where, or if Mountain House is the case maybe now, where I would have my place. It'd be quiet, and I'd do it with like pen and paper. I'd have my pad, and it would just it was kind of a free flow process. I might jot down things that I was interested in, but a lot of it was quiet and listening, and then just starting to write, and then that would evolve. When I sit back down again, I'd have a basis, and it would iterate a bit, and then you would get prompts like, well, what would next steps look like? Whether that's for me, it's so much about the journey, and who are the sojourners that you want to do these initiatives with, or that building your team around a vision. So if I got an idea, really trying to tease out whether it was valid or ready, I would start to socialize it with people that I respected, to say, here's some thoughts I think maybe coming from God, but what do you think about this? So I'd socialize it, get feedback, and again, iterate. And then, before I would launch an initiative, it would be important to build at least a handful of group of guys or gals that, bought into kind of the general vision and said, yeah, let's give this a shot, and let's take some next steps. And so that it wasn't something that I would ever strive to do alone. It would be about doing it with fellow travelers that shared a vision. And once you get a handful of guys or gals that kind of buy into something together, then boy, the energy really ramps up, and you get a lot of creative thoughts and ideas, and things just start to happen. And
David, how have you learned to run those by your wife without sort of freaking her out? Sometimes when I started halftime, I came home to Linda and I said, hey, I've been running the numbers. I think we can, live on what we have the rest of our life and do whatever the Lord has for us. And our kids were 8, 6, and 3, right? And she said, well, how simple is simple? Because I had said, if we live simply, and I didn't learn until later that I can quickly freak her out with my ideas. Yeah, and I would say for up until that, about the time we turned 50 and empty nesting, where we wanted to do something together, kind of a big initiative we've been doing down in Central America for, over 15 years now, close to 20 years, is something we've been doing together. And that was really, I would say, the first big intentional effort on my part or our part to do something together. I would say before that, it was more about me trying to figure it out and doing it. And she was raising the kids, and, that was her big focus. And, I should have engaged her more earlier than in fact I did. But I would say since that, knowing when the kids went away that there'd be a gap there, I think we've done a better job of, bouncing things off. And, I've made some bad decisions when I didn't consult her. And so she occasionally reminds me of that. And you come home every day, and, you deal with, you deal with that. So,
it's that's a big part of it. And halftime coaches that too. It's like, bring your spouse along, engage. And I think that's great advice that I could have taken better in the earlier years in particular.
David, can you talk a little bit about, I've heard you tell your story before, and I know you did a lot of things domestically, Atlanta and Dartmouth, and how did you decide to start doing work in Nicaragua, and what led you guys to start thinking internationally and what you could do there?
Yeah, it was a confluence of events. We heard talk. I think when Rick Warren was in Atlanta, my wife and I were at a kind of a luncheon with Rick, and he was talking about diversifying your giving portfolio, and he was kind of outlining the buckets, and we came away from that, Donna and I, with believing we were underrepresented in the kind of the international or poverty space, and so that was part of it. About that same time, we were introduced to a large international NGO, Opportunity International, that was doing a lot of microcredit. I mean, Chris Crane, was running the organization at that time, and there were, a bunch of dynamic, but we liked the model. It was, kind of a hand up instead of a handout. How are you helping these primarily women, get small loans so they could feed, clothe, educate their kids, and we liked that model. And but the part of the backdrop to that, for a long time, talking about like from 30s and 40s, maybe even late 20s on, I've been involved with a kind of a thought practice leader in Atlanta, Bob Lupton, who was doing a lot of urban revitalization, these underserved communities. How do you take them from this condition they're in to create thriving, healthy neighborhoods? And I had the privilege and honor of getting to know Bob and getting involved with him and work in urban Atlanta, and that exposure to, what are the principles involved with, community economic development. So I would say it's the confluence of those, having more margin that, I got one of these prompts was, I wonder what it would look like to take the principles I'd been exposed to in kind of urban Atlanta revitalization and apply those to the clients of Opportunity International in a developing country. So I called Bob and said, got this idea. What do you think? And that led to a trip up to Chicago to meet with a leadership group within Opportunity International to say, we've got an idea. What about maybe looking at a pilot project that we would help, we'd be the lead funder for, to work with some of your clients. And they said, we're ramping up in Africa, or we could do something in Central America. We said, because we wanted to be personally involved, we'd prefer Central America for ease of travel. And so they said, well, we've got a microfinance organization in Nicaragua. We said, okay, let's go. And so it's, kind of a green field. We started out with some principles but no real business plan, and it's just evolved over the years. But that's kind of that's kind of the genesis of it.
David, can you talk about the work you're doing down there, the coffee business, and how you guys are incorporating business to help these people? And then talk a little bit about that. It all has not been up and to the right. I know there was years of you guys having to fund it with your friends. And can you talk a little bit about that journey and what you guys are doing now?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long journey, and 15 years of feeding it. Everything took longer; it was more expensive, etc. And political headwinds and other headwinds, and dark days and good days. But the model itself, it's you want to identify the assets of the working poor. You don't want to you just want to identify needs and just gap the needs, but you want to build off assets. Everybody has something to contribute, and assets can be in the people, they can be in the community. We go down there, we do an asset inventory, and the greatest felt need is economic development or economic needs. So we want to come up with our model. It does a lot in communities, but because the greatest felt need down there is economic, we want to lead with economic development. So we do an asset inventory down there. We identified agriculture and tourism as the two big industries that had a lot of growth potential and could present opportunities for jobs for the working poor, value add jobs for the working poor. So those ag and tourism we also do kind of an economic scan to see that as well, the industries. And so where does the top down, where are the industries where you see growth, but also what are the skill sets or assets that you see in the individual, the community. So ag bubbled up. And one of the crops that a lot of the smallholder subsistence farmers grow is yucca or cassava. So we began to focus on how could we organize or add value to that crop and help them with enhancing their livelihoods. And so over a period of years, and there are a lot of iterations of this, but I think what we have done well is we learned how to organize smallholder farmers. We give them access to credits so they can get farm loans for seeds and fertilizers, things like that. We've got agronomists on our staff that teach them kind of good or best practices in farming and agriculture. Very importantly, as you can continue to move up kind of the food chain, we built a state-of-the-art processing plant. We hired back a dozen years ago or so a young entrepreneur that really enabled us to think at a whole nother level from an economic development. And he studied yucca processing plants around the globe and came back and basically informed us that if we want to be globally competitive, we've got to be state of the art. And then so we figure out how to finance and get money for a processing plant. And then the last big part of the kind of how do we connect these smallholder farmers to the global supply chain was the sales cycle. So we felt like we had a good product that we were producing, this yucca. We're processing it to a very high quality flour. It's a gluten-free product, and our primary customers now are U.S. Food companies that use it in their products, snacks, things like that. So we've got some big buyers here, and that's really taken off in the last 2 or 3 years. We now employ in our total work down there probably 175 full-time people. We work with probably close to 1,000 farmers now, providing kind of a complete field to market services. And after a fairly lengthy sales cycle where we had to earn the trust, here we were, a nonprofit, processing in Nicaragua. How does that, all the food certifications and the like, but we finally broke through that, and the pandemic actually helped us when some supply chain issues cropped up. We had opportunities to get in with some companies, and now we've got we're doing over $1 million a month in sales, and with a good healthy margin and EBITDA. And we're now, for the last couple of years, have generated enough profits from our ag business to pay for an entrepreneurial high school that we started that it now fully funds that. We do a lot of work in our communities, particularly in dozens and dozens of communities where our farmers are located. We try to build healthy communities there. So there are a lot of interventions or partnerships that we do with, like infrastructure, it can be water, roads, those type of projects, as well as building spiritual formation. We've partnered with Young Life in the region to come into our communities and help with our youth program. So it's a platform for community economic development, and anything that would contribute to the enhancement, the thriving, the flourishing of communities is on the table. So we try to foster partnerships where we can. But the big breakthrough was on the ag program, where we've got a legitimate, kind of best in class business that's funding all of our operations. And, with that, we're now able to pay our plant workers and our workers better. We can give them private insurance. Our farmers, we're trying to grow them into middle class by helping them not with just yields in the field, but how do they grow their acreage? And then, of course, better pricing, because we've got a value add crop that we've has good margins, and we can share kind of the upsides with them. So, but like I say, we started a school. I mean, education, it's an entrepreneurial high school. We teach, life skills, English, Christian values, but it's on, they're learning business skills. They do business plans and really try, in this country, you've got generally a good to great economy, where if you're coming from an underserved community, it's how do you prepare those people to take advantage of a good economy? When you're in a developing country, you're actually part of the economic solution. You're trying to teach these kids how to start business or or be leaders. And so there's a lot more in terms of the entrepreneurial bent to, if you want to earn a living in Nicaragua, you may need to be able to start your own business or be ready to be one of the leaders for one of the existing businesses. So a lot of small, medium enterprise, SME emphasis and things like that. And we built a boutique hotel there too, right? Which is impact investment, where it's a for-profit, but we got some impact investors to do that. And the kids from the school get some of their practicum training there. It's also obviously an economic generator for the region we're in. And there's a symbiotic relationship with the school where we buy our tomatoes and our lettuces and, a lot of our vegetables from the school, where we actually it's a learn by doing. We have working businesses there, but where we have a kind of a symbiotic relationship between the hotel and the school.
That's really cool. Can you talk about some of the keys that you found, like getting through the harder seasons when you guys it wasn't going as fast, you were meeting political opposition, financial struggles. Can you talk about some of the things, because you've obviously been on a 20-year journey down there, and a lot of people might have given up along the way?
Yeah, I mean, again, really believing that God was behind it. And there were times where, we felt God's pleasure. I'll sometimes say that of all the things I've been involved with, I think Don and I have felt like the work in Nicaragua is where we have most felt his pleasure. And when things got darkest, he would show up. But, from even a practical point of view, I mean, over the years, Opportunity's been a good partner. And a lot of business people really like the economic development, the sustainability model. And so over the years, we've attracted just a great board that when things got dark, pandemic, or, things took longer, cost more, they were just, they never wavered. I mean, so never felt like I was in it alone or nearly alone. We had a great group of people that just, we were enjoying each other. We were enjoying the journey together. And we felt like this was, as business people in particular, this is something that, we had skill sets to help figure out how to do this. I mean, that's kind of what we do. We deal with risk, and we deal with capital and shortfalls and, and improvising. So I think that there was a strong sense of calling, of a great group of business people that we had seen enough progress that even when we hit a wall over here, we were prepared to persevere. And I think one of the lessons there too is, this social entrepreneurship stuff. It's hard work, in some ways harder than business. And, you've got to have clarity of calling. You've got to, how do you get traction? And how does that transition from just kind of a business model to, the mission model, and how does all that work? It's not easy, but I think team is a big part of it. I mean, really, building that well, and knowing that it's going to take longer, and being prepared for a long haul, not just a type A quick fix, get from here to there this quickly. Respecting, you're working with low income people, respecting process, the dignity of everybody, what everybody has to contribute. So the pace, has to be dictated by their ability to lead and grow, and just, lessons like that are, I think, really important.
David, go ahead.
David, there's just so many layers to your learning, right? Learning to listen to the Lord, learning to build a team, learning to just celebrate the Lord's presence when things are hard, learning how to apply gently your business skills without running ripshod over people, learning how to adapt to culture and quick, fast fail strategies, and then at the same time having the vision to take it to scale. Like, just this half hour, right, Micah, is basically an MBA in how to take your business skills and apply them in a way that produce 100x. And I love that it includes the gospel and the power of the gospel, but it represents the gospel because it's good news. It shows up in a community as good news. And what's really, when you think about your family, you know, when you and I first met, your kids are maybe 8 to 10 years older than mine. Carter's now 37. Is your oldest boy about 45?
42.
42. I remember just learning from you how you parented, and I took notes, you know, and thought about it afterwards. And I've really talk a little about how your journey of faith and these difficult, humbling times and then big wins, how does that play out in shaping the heart and character of the kids and potentially grandkids now?
Yeah, I heard someone once say, "You don't know how well you've parented till you know how your grandkids turn out." We'll, time will tell. But parenting. Certainly, I would say this certainly about adult kids is they're very different at 25 than 35 or 45. So it's not, obviously you've got those formative years where, are they rooted in their faith? That's first and foremost. But, how do you expose them to things outside of our bubble, their bubble, where you can take a lot of things for granted in America, affluent America, that are just not the realities of the world out there, where 2/3 of the world's living on $4 a day or less. So how do you be intentional about exposing them to that side of things, whether that's in your own city or whether that's globally, so that they've got a better perspective? And I think that's one of the great things of international travel and being exposed to developing country, poverty and the like, is it's an awakening that it's hard to walk away from once you've really seen that. But obviously spiritual formation is important, but work ethic's important. But I think a lot of our parenting was just to learn by observing. As we all know, we don't finesse our kids. They pick up the bad stuff is the good stuff. You can't just talk to them and they buy it. They're watching, and so what you model is what I think is what's going to have the greatest sticking influence over time. But we've exposed our kids to our work, our nonprofit ministry, civic work, and we feel like they've got to find their own journey based upon their own passions and strengths. But we love to, they've been down and involved and supportive of Nicaragua, and we're beginning to think about succession planning there a little bit more, because our board is aging, and we're at we need to be thinking about that. How do we bring in the younger generation, not just in that, but in other endeavors as well. When the kids are in their 25s, they're still, you're still looking to see how are they doing with their faith, how are they doing with marriage, and if they've got young kids, how are they parenting? Do they have a business track? Are they kind of getting that figured out? A lot more by, say, 35 than you do 25. And so I think that's different. But, Don and I did a family financial philosophy back a couple of decades ago that just, helped us define, what's the finish line for us, what do we want to do for our kids, and then what do we want to do regarding philanthropy. And that's been kind of a guiding template for us. It's got a lot of flexibility built in it based upon changing life stages and circumstances, but it's still been a good template for us to, try to define a finish line for us, so that we're kind of lifestyle. We still like to do good travel, but, we're in the same home we've been in for 35 years. And, we're trying to be conscious of that. We live well, but, we don't, define that. And then what do we want to do for the kids? And then the balance of that is, okay, how can we use our surplus to do good redemptive things out there?
David, how have you balanced over the years a thriving business and impact work? It sounds like since you were roughly 40. So how over the last 20, 25 years have you balanced both those worlds?
Yeah, I mean, it was, that parallel track that Halftime and Bob spoke about. It was like, I never have felt the call to leave the business. I feel like business, and I've been very involved in Atlanta, and having a development company in Atlanta does give me a certain platform, and I think it's a platform for affluence, creating surplus, but it's also a platform for influence. And I really think the influence over time is the more important one. I mean, you look at the great figures of history, and they were the ones that had influence, not affluence. I mean, the good influencers can attract capital, but it is nice to be able to have a surplus so that you can seed finance certain ideas to see to take them to a point to see whether there's enough acceptance by others or the market to that idea. So it's nice to have that kind of seed capital or working capital. And I think that's, the surplus to me. I think of surplus as working capital in a lot of ways. But there's a tension. I think, again, a lot of it's about building your team and how do you empower the team so that as you get older, Bob would talk about, how much you're not always the one providing the energy anymore, right? You're kind of going into that, from that warrior to sage, somewhere in there, warrior, king, sage, whatever. And, so, the younger people, they want more opportunities. So, we've done succession planning at our company, and I still am active and do the things I feel like I need to do. But I would say my time probably went from 50-50 to now I'm probably 20-25% business, and the balance on the civic and ministry type stuff, the social entrepreneurship type stuff. And it just feels like I feel like God has changes our hearts and minds over time to where it was a fairly natural points of transition for me, at least, where I felt less, the thrill of the chase of a deal diminished, and the desire to be more over here on this other side increased. And but I do think that whether it's, it's a faith journey. I think whether you're engaging on a social entrepreneurial endeavor, and you can only see so far. I think a lot of this is, these things are bigger than us. We don't know what's around the corner real estate wise, like the headwinds we're facing now in Nicaragua. We couldn't see too far around the corner, but it reminds me frequently that this is a faith journey. We're not meant to see too far around the corner. That requires us to look to God, depend upon God for guidance and encouragement and wisdom, and the humility of realizing, we're limited. And so, kind of this surrender, humility, obedience, are themes that come back from, that are, I think, integral to understanding how do you deal with the tensions. We deal with all sorts of tensions in life. We strive for balance, but we deal with tensions. And I think it's through, those tensions are what I think call us back to God to say, I need your wisdom. I need your guidance. I need your encouragement. All those things are critical, I think, to avoid, making major missteps along the way.
David, what advice do you have for people that are processing running a parallel track? If they're busy with their career, but they feel, they're feeling the tension of, Halftime calls it smoldering discontent, but it's like business doesn't give them what it once gave them, and they want to do something that they feel like matters. What advice do you have, with the blessing of perspective and hindsight? Like, what advice do you have for those people?
Well, I think creating margin, being intentional about creating margin, it jumps out. That do you have the financial margin? Do you have the time margin? Do you have the energy or emotional margin to do other than your business? So creating margin in intentional ways, and some of that means, are you in a position to step back from your day-to-day business responsibilities? But figuring all those things out so that you have peace of mind. And the other thing I would say is, parallel track's a lot easier than cold turkey. People that just sell a business and then try and jump into, I want to do some good works. That's a hard transition. I do think the softer transitions where, you're doing these probes and you're seeing how that goes. And if you're getting traction, if you're getting good feedback, then you devote more time, more resources, more energy, more networking to it. But you may, not everything, sometimes you think you hear a word and you go out there and you test it, or, and you say, well, either it needs, maybe the timing's not right, or maybe it needs to iterate in some way that I haven't figured something out. So I think having enough margin to do those kind of probes and socializing ideas and trying things is really important. And to get some level of affirmation that you're on the right track. All a man's ways seem right in his own eyes. So I think we do need some type of filter or feedback, accountability to test some of these prompts and ideas to see whether, is God really in them? Did I hear well? And as importantly, am I building the right foundation for success down the road? So it's a little messy, but start with margin and socialize it. See if you get the traction, and just kind of listen and iterate.
Thank you for listening to the 100X podcast. Please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast service. We would greatly appreciate it if you could rate the show and leave us a review. This podcast is sponsored by Anchor Investments, whose mission is to build America's most generous real estate company. To learn more, please visit anchorinv.com.